Thank you for tuning. Today, we have with us Clint Walton from Walton Group Consulting. Clint, please say hi to the people.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And for all those listening and watching, it's a pleasure to be here. Pasha and I, we've had some really good conversations. And so we're just continuing the conversation here. It's great to be here. Great to see you, Pasha.
Absolutely. I appreciate you taking time to spend with us and invest in the community and in conversation. Um, One of the best ways to add value is it starts with a conversation, right? So, as you said, we're continuing that here. You introduced me to someone that we're going to get into, um, which I was pretty interested in what they're doing, what they did, the conversations. Sandy Pentland, Alex Sandy Pentland, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we share experience and background dealing with process optimization, right? And here on YNet 7 and Pasha Pyro in general, that's what we stand for, right? Let's start to migrate that same philosophies from the manufacturing world, from the
Mhm.
business world into our communities to really help, as they know I articulated, reduce the codependency on big government and large corporations by creating more sustainable communities, right? So let's do a high level overview from your perspective on the value of that transition in our communities nationwide, and what value could that bring to America as a whole?
Yeah, and so that's a really chief concern that I see as far as our communities, our organizations that support our community, is that they're well-run organizations and they're healthy organizations. They're supporting a healthy community. This is why one of the things that I do what I do
Mhm.
is having the corporate background and then also having the community background, heavily involved in our church, and very committed to family and all of those things that support a strong community. We one thing that we talked about is the principle of we had this previous conversation. What's most universal turns out to be most personal, and kind of what's most personal about is turns out to be also what's universal. So we can go through. We can immediately start talking about how all the ways that we are different, if that's our mindset, is to distinguish, make distinctions in that way, or we can initiate and start the conversation by all the things that we have in common. And as you know, our conversation that we had was we started first by talking about all the things that we have in common, and that initially builds that bridge on, okay, then that interdependence
Mhm.
instead of that codependence of someone's in a position of power. So it turns that someone's teaching someone something, or someone's in a position of power to I've got to share something with you, or I've got to bring you up to speed on something. And some of that language, it almost kind of starts steering towards that codependent relationship. On the other side of that, and there may be a time for that, some independence until we get to interdependence. But as fast as we can get to an interdependent relationship where we're both bringing those things to the table, we're both bringing our perspectives, our mindset, and not that it's we're not going through of who's right and wrong and going through that path, but it's like, let's see where we have common ground, common goals, and let's do that on a supportive fashion. So to share that with you, that's kind of the end goal first. But before we get there, and before I can bring value to my community, I kind of first have to see there's this inside out approach that I'm thinking about, that I have to be effective for myself, first. I kind of have to look at
Like that.
my effectiveness. I can jump in, I could attend a board meeting or a company meeting, and it's my first time, and I could jump in and start offering ideas and, oh, you could fix this and you should work on that. But that turns out to be just a lot of noise. The first approach that we know, and if we're looking at some of these principles, and I draw a lot on like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits Highly Effective People.
Mhm.
Before I can really be effective, I have to listen first. I have to find out about Pasha. I have to find out, well, what are Pasha's goals? What's his mission? Why is he doing what he's doing? Where's his heart? Turns out to be in community building and sustainable communities. And then so I want to, before I jump in and start offering solutions and start thinking, providing direction, it's like, let's start with having a conversation. Let's start, and you mentioned that, starting with having a conversation and learning, and really, and learning and really getting a understanding of where you're coming from, what your intentions are, and what then, after all of that, I still need to build trust. I still need to get permission.
Hmm.
I need to gain and ask you for permission to participate. Just because I was invited to the meeting does not give me the permission to sit at the table and start offering solutions. So it's a kind of an organic approach that it's a staged approach.
Wow.
And each stage has its place. And as we start to have that understanding, then we can even become more effective. And instead of jumping in and start offering solutions and people are like, whoa, 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 who is this guy? What's his background? Can we trust him? And
Mm.
then I've been in some of the community situations that, and people have the greatest intention, and they jump in a little bit too soon, start to offer solutions, start to offer ideas for thoughts, and then they experience pushback, because people will want to challenge that, and that's part of the collaboration process, is challenging those ideas. And then they'll experience that they may tend to take that personal, and they're like, oh, well, they didn't like me, they didn't like my ideas, and it's like that had nothing to do with it. Had to build the relationship first, had to build the trust first, had to understand the situation first. And that, it's like growing the garden. If we're doing some things kind of sustained community, it doesn't happen overnight. That relationship building piece has to happen first, and it cannot be rushed. So hope that kind of goes around the long way around the mountain to answer your question, but it takes a minute to kind of unpack that, and the reason why I take that approach that I do. It's like, let's connect first. Let's work on building that trust and building that relationship and get an understanding first. Then we can start talking about some solutions after we get permission. So is any of that kind of resonating with your processes and what your experience has been?
Absolutely. In many ways, like when you said the asking of permission to offer solutions, even though you were already invited to sit at the table, right? It's like, okay, and this really great. I really appreciate this exercise.
Yeah, yeah,
So what that does for me is it actually shows, because here's the thing, here's the golden rule.
yep,
Anytime we point a finger, right? Spider-Man, right? There's
yep,
always
yep,
3 fingers pointing back at us. So what
yep,
happens is I have this stance that I hear to being what I call a man of equations, right? Not the variables. So, and we talked about this a little bit too. So the equation is That's the equation in this application. Anytime we point a finger, it's three pointing back at us. So we could eat. It's easy for the community because that's the number. That'll be like the
Mhm.
democracy of the thing, right? The mob rule. The
Mhm.
the numerous group is the community saying, "Hey, look, we allowed you to come here, but we ain't ready for your offerings of solutions for us, right?" And
Right.
this is and we get into Simon Sinek and stuff, which we talk about often here. That's that example of, hey, the way corporate America is set up is to disregard and make an outcast of the one that comes ahead of time, warning of the panic or the crisis to come, but
Mhm.
then put on an altar or pedestal, amplify, excuse me, the ones
Mhm.
who stand up in the middle of the crisis to fix it when shit hit the fan, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think this is actually a perfect intro to the conversation because it's going to show the value, right?
Mhm.
It's going to
Yeah.
show that the same way the community as a whole maybe judging or viewing that person as,
Mhm.
hey, look, we're not ready. We didn't ask for that, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Is the
Mhm.
same
Right.
is the same that same scenario shows basically that the community wasn't in a position of organization and thoughts of the future of where it was trying to go to then see the value when it was presented to them to know that that's what they actually need until sometime in the future,
Yeah.
which is the exact underpinning of why this conversation that we're having today needs to be circulated in the community, because we need to get the buy-in from the community to come together, start talking with itself, start assigning the destination, right? Because
Yeah.
like you said, in order for one to be successful, you feel like you must first be effective yourself. And I applaud that statement because that's exactly why, like when you talk to me on certain levels, I'm like, yeah, I was a green belt at 3M. I was
Mhm.
working
Yep.
on $1 million. I was not working on, but leading $1 million projects for them. I did that. Part of the reason why I did that is because I don't have a degree, so it was a great kick down the door and be the only non-production worker that don't have a degree in that operation. But you
Yeah.
do that so that you get the experience and cultivate um, success in those processes on a high level for the corporate America world, and then translate it back home to the community, and you can fall back on that experience and workspace because you've already done it on a high level here that's
Right.
documented, where versus just showing up to someone's door at the community saying, "Hey, we could change the world together. Let's do this." And they're like, "Well,
Yeah.
how? What?" And then the disbelief factor. So I like that because of the Simon Sinek thing that we talk about often. Once you agree on a destination, it makes it easier to overcome all obstacles, which
Yes.
which then puts us in this position here, right? Going to Sandy Pentland, right?
Mhm.
Alex
Yes.
Sandy Pentland.
Yep.
I found that very interesting because they did some numerous experiments, numerous implementations
Mhm.
to show social value of working together, right?
Yeah.
I think it was titled Social Physics, right?
Correct.
So the one thing I found really amazing was this. I'm gonna give you this segue, and I want you to take the floor and just continue with this from this
Yeah.
vantage
No,
point.
this is good. Yep.
Okay, so one of the experiments that led to implementation they did was with a project in Switzerland
Mhm.
where the
Mm.
community was trying to save power, right?
Yep.
The community had a hydroelectric setup, so they were good. But then anything above that threshold of production, they had to use generators, which were diesel, noisy, expensive, polluting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they did this experiment, right,
Right.
to lead to implementation. And what they did was they created a system of temporary influence for measure it
Mm.
was like a buddy system. Like you come in the program with your buddy, and when your buddy conserved energy, you received a reward. Now the rewards were negligible in this experiment. It wasn't really about the like finding, you weren't there to get rich. It was there to create a mindset. So you signed up with a buddy. When your buddy saved energy, you got a reward, and it created a new habit. And stars points on the website, whatever. So what they learned from that experiment was that from the people who signed up together and participated in it, they had an average reduction in energy of 17% usage.
Mhm.
Now, here's the caveat. Mr. Pentland or Sandy Pentland said that they performed similar, like companies that did it another way. They
Mhm.
achieved 17% in reduction, but they found out they had to double the cost of the energy to do that. They didn't say they needed double the cost to make the production happen. They doubled the cost to lower the usage of it by 17%. So let's take a moment and now, because that blew my mind. It makes sense when you think about it from a psychological standpoint, but the fact that they would raise the rates of the electricity to serve the community to generate a reduction is what we're looking at if we don't do something as a community within the community to generate the reduction ourselves. So it's kind of like, here's a question on the table. Do you want to pay twice as much for your electricity, or do you want to come together and start developing programs, initiatives, and new thought processes to conserve energy and or eventually create our own energy supplies for our communities? Talk just take the floor with that and go, because there's a lot of ways you can go with that. Let me hear what you got to say.
No, and I recall that same study that he talks about, and Alex, Sandy Alex Pentland, he also has some podcasts and videos out that's been published through like MIT, that he talks about those experiments. And that was the shocking thing of it, that they would raise the rates.
Yeah.
They would, and not just, by a few percentage points, like what was it, 10, 15, 20? I'd have to go back and look at it, but it was like a significant raise in rates just for what they thought that would cause people to get more efficient appliances and not use their power, not use the electricity during peak hours. But that did not drive behavior change. And so there's another professor that I like, and that I'll have to go back and research his name. His name isn't just popping up in my memory right now, but the principle is, if there's not, we can read the books, we can watch the podcast, we can educate ourselves, we can do all that. But if it doesn't create behavior change, if it doesn't have us change our patterns, change our perspectives on how we see ourselves, how we see the world, if nothing really changes, then how effective was it?
Right.
So they're looking at, how do we change behavior? And the old mode of what I call the carrot and stick mentality. It's either the reward or the punishment. And that was, if those are the only two tools that you have in your toolbox to work with people, and maybe you have a team, and you're leading a team, or maybe you're a team member, we're all trying to influence. We're all trying to, we want to contribute. This is one thing that I look at through everyone I've met, everyone that I've worked with. If you spend enough time with folks, you'll find out that they truly have a heart to contribute. There may be, the 3 or 4 or 5% out there that are just trying to, feed off society or whatever. But that's a very small percentage. The vast majority, the 95% of people, are truly wanting to have some significance, impact their community, contribute to their community, grow it, sustain it. But they've hit a roadblock, they hit obstacles, they don't know what are the next steps. There's challenge in connecting and finding a common goal. Pasha, you could talk, extensively on all the challenges and the obstacles that it's like, hey, I'm here to help, and you're throwing all these obstacles in front of me. It's like, what's up with that? So, but at the heart of that still doesn't change your heart to want to contribute. You're like, I'm going to find another way. I'm going to find another way. I'm going to have some more conversations. But back to that is, influencing ourselves and influencing others to actual behavior change, to actually taking action towards what it is, what the goal is, and what it is that we want. But in order to, again, get there, if the only two tools you have in your toolbox are either incentives or punishments, that's very limited. What I like about Pentland and what he talks about is he takes it back to that kind of buddy system.
Mm-hmm.
That and instead of like I've seen on had a friend of mine, someone I knew, they got their power bill. They lived in California, and it said they ranked my friend against his neighbors, and it was just kind of like this shame approach, like, oh, you're using more power than your neighbors. So it's like that system. What Pendleton did in his state is like none of those types of measures worked.
Mm-hmm.
What worked was they incentivized your friends. So in this case, if your if Pasha, if your power usage went down, then I would get the reward.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my incentive to call, to every time I talk to Pasha, is like, oh yeah, hey, are you still, running your washer and disher machine at 5 o'clock when everyone else is running theirs? So it made it part of the conversation. It made it personal. So that's all great for utility bills, and we definitely want to pay attention to those, of course. However, how can we take this as a principle and use it in our communities, and not in a manipulative way,
Right.
but use it in a principled way to help support our goals, to help support our friends' goals. And that's one of the first conversations that I really liked that you and I had, Pasha, was you were asking me what my goals were. I was asking you what your goals were. And we were having this conversation. How can I support you? How can you support me?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that is part of that buddy system. If we can have more of those connections, that now that I know what your goals are, every time we have a conversation, it's like, hey, how are your goals? It's not strong arm pressure, no shame, no, accountability, all of that. It's just one friend asking another, hey, how are you doing? Can I support? Is there anything I can do? That's a different paradigm. That's a supportive paradigm, and really takes it away from carrot and stick to the human relation side of things. So that was my big takeaway from Pitland, was that, hey, there's an opportunity here to look at it from a different perspective and honor someone's natural proclivity to contribute, to want to contribute. Everyone wants a better environment for their community, for the world. They want that for themselves. That's natural. It's
Mm-hmm.
inherent. It's in all of us, or it's in 95% of us. It's in the vast majority of that. Let's tap into that instead of going back to the old tools of carrot and stick. If that resonates with you, does
No,
that
absolutely.
connect with you? Or because that feels much more kind of a natural, this was my idea, I have a choice, I'm still autonomous, and it's much more, like kind of empowering, if you will. I still have the power, we're still sharing the power, so to speak, the authority, the autonomy, the
Yes.
agency, in whatever psychological terms that you want to use. But that feels a lot stronger than I'm standing over you, I'm telling you what to do, or I'm shaming you into this. That may work for the moment, but that's not sustainable.
Right.
So, does that connect with what your experience is in building communities and sustaining communities?
Absolutely. I think regardless of the size of the community, 5 people on a team, or if you're dealing with your neighborhood,
Mhm.
or eventually working up to have a message of activism and change in your county and state, or then eventually the national level, I think that's definitely something that needs to be considered. And we actually not discovered, but we reminded in the
Mhm.
prior conversation I had yesterday for the viewers of the difference between transactional leadership with Touchdown Tina, right?
Mhm.
I'll introduce you to offline. Touch
Fair enough.
Transactional leadership versus transformative.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing right here because when you bring in the buddy system, like in Boy Scouts,
Yeah.
the buddy system not only was there for the protection and safety value. If one person gets injured, the other person's there to help and or secure them while they go get help if they need to.
Mhm.
But also the accountability factors, right? And I like when you brought up in an expanded explanation of like, hey, calling up the buddy saying, hey, are you still using your washer and dryer and like in this form? Because what that really is an opportunity for to generate shared innovation. See, now people are talking about, well, what are you doing to cut back? And what are
Mhm.
you, whereas
Mhm.
that conversation may have never happened before. Someone would be getting the bill and it'd be a $600 electric bill, and they're like, damn,
Mhm.
that's fucked up. You know what I mean? Like, or
Mhm.
they're thinking, what do you do that makes you use it? You know what I mean? And it's like now the incentive is there to have the conversation even ahead of time in some cases of
Mhm.
how do we cut back without losing our quality of life, etc. And then on the far down the road of that could be, well, why don't we just generate a new way to
Mhm.
make power in our community? See, so we
Mhm.
don't need the grid. Now you're in
Mhm.
that. Now you're becoming super sustainable in that fashion, and I think that's great. Um, but the shocker in that was the fact of, oh yeah, they doubled the rate of cost to generate that same 17% reduction. Now,
Mhm.
think about the key stakeholders in a community. You got residents, you got local businesses, there's education institutions. We know the government's good for right raising the rates on everything.
Mhm.
Developers, builders, health and social services, environmental groups, transportation. We just talked about utilities. Go into the financial world with the banking factors. We need to be diligently looking at this because what if that's the practice in all of those industries within our community? Oh, we'll just raise the rates because we want to
Mhm.
limit this and limit that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you see that in a loose term of gentrification and physical property, but look at all the other opportunities that are affected by it under terms that maybe not even being discussed right now. And it's only ourselves and our communities to blame because we're not being transformative and we're not taking a transformative leadership approach. So I like that you brought up early on we mentioned conversation in the beginning because we need to
Mhm.
clearly articulate the purpose and the goals, get the community together to start talking about where they want to get to so
Mhm.
that we can then figure out the path to get there. So how can continuous improvement and lead to collective financial benefits for the community members as well? Because that's going to probably be most people's complaint or question is what's in
Mhm.
it for them, right? So we have the
Yeah.
individual goal, but the way that uh, Pentland described it was they actually said that when you incentivize the network,
Mhm. Mhm.
it was up to, if they tweaked it right, it had the potential to go based on their research 8 to 10 times more effective.
Mhm. Mhm.
So whether it's a business and or a community or even a household, talk to us about, the strategies that can start to foster a sense of community ownership and participation in that. How would you approach that? What do you look for to start generating that in a business and or a community?
Yeah. And when I'm working with business leaders, when I'm working with business owners and investors, that's the one thing that we're looking at. And you mentioned stakeholders earlier, and that is really a key to it is look at and that next stage, kind of where you were going with the a there's a term that's used, that interdependence
Mhm.
or that synergy approach, that how we begin to have that conversation. uh, I can have an idea and you can have an idea, and then we can have a conversation about those ideas. If we're approaching the challenge that we're facing or the opportunity that's in front of us by us collaborating, by us listening, by us understanding the other person's perspective, what their goal is, what their intention is, by first understanding their position and not judging, not jump in and say, "Oh, well, I know what Pasha's thinking." It's like, no, that is not the approach. It
Mhm.
is being curious. It is asking questions, and not asking questions just to be, again, manipulative, but to truly want to understand what their experience is like. Then we can start to collaborate. Then we can find third alternatives that neither one of us thought about in the beginning, and we're finding even better solutions. That's sustained community. That's a sustained business. Because I was having a conversation with a client just this morning that um, his wife is a gardener, and she's making gardens, and he was telling me about that. We were just having this conversation about that, and I had heard another story, and a story from a pastor of a church we attend, and he was talking about a plant that he had and how it became root bound.
Hmm.
And so he had this plant that it looked like the leaves were starting to die and decay, and he hadn't done anything different than he had done for the previous year. He watered it. He paid attention to it. Not a lot, but it's like it started to die, and he's like, don't understand what, I'm not doing anything different.
Mm.
But then he pulled the plant out and looked, and it was root bound. All the roots had like grown together, and it had reached the capacity of that pot. So he took it, he untwisted the roots on it, and put some new soil on it, put it in a bigger pot, and then the plant started to flower. He didn't even know that it had flowers with
Wow.
his plant. But that can happen with the stagnant thinking, and that's the other thing. Back to like making the connection with Pentland, is I don't know if you noticed that that the networks, they track the metadata on cell phones. They watched
Mhm.
where people's travel patterns were, and the people that made more connections were actually had more revenue. They had more wealth. The people that just stayed in their neighborhood, they never got out. They never had any other conversations, and for whatever reason, there may be socioeconomic reasons why they're not having those conversations. But if they're like root bound to just that, their thinking, and they're not bouncing those ideas off of anyone else, if they're not challenging the mindsets, if they're not coming up with those third alternative options to come up with some of the, to go after some of these opportunities, or to address some of the challenges that we see in the world, we can become root bound if we're not connecting with our community, if we're not challenging it, if our ideas don't get challenged. Then, you know if I'm not talking to clients, if I'm not talking to friends or my mentors, my coaches, my consultants, then
Mhm.
my thinking can get stagnant, and it can happen very quickly. And then I can become root bound, and then I'm just living in my own head. So that's not a good position to be in, to for us to contribute, because ultimately it's like we want to be effective, we want to contribute. We can't contribute at that level if we're just stuck in our own world and not reaching out. So um, come taking that effectiveness, what does it mean? It means that it enables us to go in and make more of a contribution, and being open to conversations. It allows us to learn more, and then therefore then contribute more. So
I like that.
um, uh, hopefully that you see, that connects the dots, hopefully, a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I like the example of the plant because that was a perfect analogy for the transactional leadership. not doing anything different is what actually, it was working. Everything was great. It's working. Don't change it. We've been doing the same thing like this for
That's
20
right.
years. We heard, right? But not doing anything different, the same thing that brought that plant to success and flourishing for a period of time, is the exact same thing that started it to die and wither.
Yeah.
So if that leadership, if you look at the gardener of the plant, and call it leadership, if that leadership had continued to do the same thing, the plant would have died completely.
Yeah, that's right.
So that would be the same effect in business and community, right?
Yeah.
So this is how the conversations and the destinations conversations need to be had to see what the value is, right? You
Yeah.
may find, I like that you mentioned the data aspect, because once you go to data, you remove the emotion in the presentation to people, right? And it makes it easier to buy in when you see, well, here's the truth, not my truth, your truth, their truth, our truth, but the truth is this: solid presentation, numbers, non-emotional. Because then a community may say, oh shit, maybe we don't need to build a park for our kids to play in, but we need to build instead on that same land or in that same budget a business center to cultivate financial independence for our whole neighborhood, thus creating a higher per capita for our neighborhood. Then put our kids into programs that we can now afford to create ourselves and or generate or outsource, because we have the extra per capita as a neighborhood, to then put them at a higher level of competition locally and against China and globally, right? So that we make our growth sustainable over generations. So now take a moment, Clint, and introduce the people to who you actually are and what you do for Walton Group at Walton Group Consulting, and share with us how data-driven decision making is actually powerful to make informed decisions in what you do as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that is where I had my background in data analysis. And I was a director of data analysis for a automotive marketing firm. It was based out of Los Angeles. I worked with them for a number of years, had a data analyst team in San Diego and one in Kansas City. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything other than I saw a lot of interaction. I saw a lot of interaction with clients, with manufacturers. This was performance parts. So they were building hot rods. They were building oversized vehicles. They were building recreational vehicles. These were all the toys that we get to enjoy, right? when we get to that point, so this was not like this isn't this isn't bread and butter. This isn't feeding folks. It was purely a recreational, this was a recreational marketplace. Okay. So the data that was being shared, and it was very important. I mean, it was very important that the data that we were getting, the evidence that we could see what the market trends were, what was, these factories were making big decisions on their future based on the data that we were collecting. So it was very important that we were getting a good source of data right from the client. And because if it could cost, a company millions, if not tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, if they were starting to build out products that didn't sell when they hit the market. So it was very important that we got good source of information and that we got evidence that would back that up, because they were executives making decisions for shareholders and for stakeholders based on this, and people's jobs were at stake. So we took our job very seriously. We didn't take ourselves seriously, but we took our job seriously. With that also started having conversations with business owners. We worked with a lot of large manufacturers, but we also worked with a lot of startups and a lot of companies that were supporting those larger manufacturers. I know that a lot of times big business, and yes, they're strong. They can take the criticism. Uh, but one thing to maybe not defend some of their actions, but as a whole, there's always bad actors. They make the headlines, and so you get the one bad actor, the one and then sometimes that starts to look at like, oh, the whole industry is bad, or or big business is bad. But a lot of these large businesses, they were supporting a lot of smaller businesses. And then we were working with those folks as well. And we would solve their data problem. Then they would start asking, well, if you solve that, what about this? What about this in operations? What about this in marketing? What about our sales numbers? What about our financials? So we became that trusted source to, they invited us into other areas of their business. And that I was very honored to be invited into having those other conversations with them, because a lot of the same principles of having evidence and having the data to back up the decision just naturally transferred. It may be different data points and it may be different goals, but the principles behind it, uh, they made that connection there. So from there, I had a transition out of that industry. I really wanted to work with small businesses, entrepreneurs, and startups. And I saw a lot of folks that were leaving the corporate world and they were launching their own business. And a lot of them were going through some challenges. A lot of we all know the statistics on the number of businesses that fail versus the ones that succeed. And we know there's a lot more that end up failing or having to go through 2 or 3 iterations of a startup before they get traction and they succeed. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the numbers are, if you want to launch a business or launch a startup, the deck is already stacked against us. We just know that. So I wanted to do everything necessary in my power and with my firm that we could support and increase the probability of success. We couldn't guarantee it, but at least what can we do to increase the probability? Again, back to that data mindset, right? Because I wanted to be, we weren't going to come in and say we can guarantee success. Too many factors. There's too many unknowns. But what can we do to move the needle to help tilt the scales in their favor? So having those conversations, listening to entrepreneurs, listening to what they need, it came really down to marketing and innovation. They needed to innovate on their products. We've seen that, BlackBerry to iPhone.
Right.
We've seen that from Blockbuster to Netflix. Each one of those companies that we haven't heard about in years and years, it's like they fall by the wayside. The companies that continue to innovate, innovation is critical. Bringing in, again, back to Pentland, bringing in new ideas, bringing in new concepts, learning from that, having a learning organization. That's really critical. And this goes back to Peter Drucker. It's innovation in marketing. So we can have the greatest products. If no one knows who we are, no one will get to experience what it's like to, work with Pasha. But Pasha has great marketing, so people get to know him. So with that, we started focusing on marketing and innovation and an evidence-based approach to what's our deliverable. And we were able to, and we work with a great marketing company, DMA.company. They're marketing, and they're a technology-based marketing firm. They can build dashboards. They can build tools that you can actually pull the data, pull the evidence. And I'm really good friends with the CEO there. And we've got a good symbiotic relationship with them as well, an interdependent relationship with them, that all of the folks that need marketing, we can point them to that firm for the marketing. Then we can do the operations and the consulting and the deliverable side of things. So that's why we do that. And why we do that is because that's where our heart is. A little bit of background about me. My dad was in consulting. He was in the oil and gas industry for a number of years. And as a kid growing up, I'd go and visit in the office with him. I would just sit there, just be a fly on the wall. I would just observe. I'd see him meet with clients, see him have conversations with suppliers, with other folks that, or employees, and just general connections with people in the business community. And so after watching and observing what he did in his just day-to-day operations, I began to just by osmosis learn and pull from his knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
his willingness to really want to help his business community and his industry. So I learned a lot from there. One real quick little story that he had, and there were always opportunities that were coming and people wanting to invest in the business. So as this is kind of one thing that we look at as far as what we can control in our community, what we can't control, what I can control as just one individual, and what I can't control. I can't control a lot of these outside events that are happening in the world, but I can manage myself. I can lead myself. I can watch my attitude, my perspective. That's my locus of control. And that's what I saw in my dad and how he ran his business. There was a gentleman one time that there was a product and he said, "Hey, I think this is a great product. You should offer this as a technology product." And this was in the early days of the internet age. There were some modems that they had that were portable modems. This is before they started building the modem cards and in the hardware and the actual laptops and things. So and some of the other desktop computers. So he said, "Hey, great deal. I'll sell you some of these wholesale. You can sell them retail, and it'll be a good revenue generator for you."
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he's like, "Okay, we'll do it." He didn't bet the bank on it or anything like that, but he just thought it was a good addition. And then going through that process, the technology was moving so fast at that point that it just didn't hit that window of opportunity. And people stopped buying these types of modems, these external modems.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the days, way back in the days, and I'm showing my age here, on the days of dial-up and how we'd go through the phone. Now we have Wi-Fi. And that's how fast technology moves, right? That no one even thinks about modems anymore. But without having good business leaders, having consultants, having business coaches on your side as a business owner, it can get very lonely to share ideas and bounce ideas off of. So if you're a startup, I encourage you, work with a startup accelerator, build your team, have a support team around you. And again, going back to Pentland, don't isolate yourself. Don't think it's like, well, this is a one-man show and I've got to do everything. And I can't let anyone make any mistakes. And that's the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake is trying to do everything yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Bring your community in, bring people in, and you don't know what kind of connection can help next. And it's just like you and I meeting at the networking event and then striking conversation and seeing where it leads, and we're both open to do that. And and greatly appreciate that. And I really like your perspective. It's very valuable. And you know, we want more of that. We're going to have more conversations. As far
Absolutely.
as I'm concerned, I hope you see it the same way. But
I do,
this
Clint.
is what we need in our community. This is why I like what you're doing. It's a sustained community. It isn't a sustained Clint. It's not a sustained Pasha. This is a sustained community, because we're continually needing to, again, bounce those ideas off each other, get more information, and that changes how we see ourselves. It helps us see ourselves more clearly, and helps us see the world more clearly as well. I hope that's that makes sense.
Very, very valuable contributions, Clint. And I appreciate the conversations that led up to this one between us and the future ones as well. You made some really great points. I like that the Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Because here's the irony. This is what happens when there's a disconnect between, let's say, the leadership, even if you look at the leadership as the business offering the product or solution that the community is saying they don't want, right?
Right.
Or the change factor that maybe that person showed up to the table and didn't ask if he can contribute or offer the ideas, got frustrated, left the opportunity. Nobody wins from that, right?
Right.
Blockbuster to Netflix, we all know the story of how Blockbuster had a chance to buy Netflix, passed on it, said that'll never work. Netflix grows, blows up. But the irony is that Blockbusters go out of business because they have a brick and mortar. And now it done come full circle. Netflix is opening brick and mortars because they're selling now the experience.
Yeah.
So you had a situation where if Blockbuster maybe did the research in advance, they could have bridged the gap. Although it'd be a decade away, they could have bridged the gap to say, hey, well, if we change the experience factor, we can survive this onslaught from Netflix and maybe even have won the battle. You bring up the modem situation, right? The irony is, the Gen Pop stopped buying external modems because everything was being consolidated into the space and size of a computer, PC.
Yep.
However, if they had changed their application to the big business, large infrastructures, external modems are still being used in data centers and call centers to pump out the volume needed, because you can't do that on a small configuration. So if they had the foresight to just get the data, speak with the customers, have that conversation, maybe they could have survived, So what's happening is,
Right.
you bring up a lot of key points here, because that's the osmosis factor. That's getting that support unit around you that you mentioned to say, hey, wait a minute, we're struggling here, but there's a way. Let's talk about it. And then bring in the customers. Let's see what they want. What directions are they going? And that could have been identified long in advance. Then not being afraid to delegate, because part of what we do, we come into different organizations, different opportunities. We go through a process because we're masters of a process that can be applied to virtually any situation. The luxury is that nobody is starting at the same spot, although they may be wanting to achieve similar destinations. Like if you wanted to get on the football field, well, where on the football field? You got the 20-yard line, you got midfield, you got the end zone. So you can arrive at the football field, but still be at different places in the football field. So when I say nobody's starting at the same spot and nobody's wanting to get to exactly the same spot, that's what I mean in a visualization. So real quick, because we're coming on time here, I want you to close on that, because what's going to be left is, once we go through the process of showing the value, cultivating that support group around ourselves to implement the change in a business or a community, we have to create the controls to secure that the implementation will live long term. So that brings you into the quality circles or working groups within the community or business to address specific issues and opportunities, and then also encouraging and empowering the business members or community members to take on leadership roles and contribute to decision-making processes. Can you close on some ideas about that for us?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'll tell you what, one process that we go through with clients is we're looking at, because at the very core is our identity. We talked about that behavior change and how I want to be effective for myself. That comes back to, is almost on a personal development level, that it's how, moving to that leadership role. I've got to first start to see myself as that leader before I'm stepping out on that. Now, um, again, on the executive development side, and I'll just run through this real quick. We've seen those 4 quadrants before of employee to self-employed to business owner to investor. There's like those 4 quadrants, and that's a progression. And we see that a lot with the executives. And this is something that I learned as I saw those executives that left their companies and then they went into business for themselves. That was the challenge, is that they saw how they saw themselves. They can no longer see themselves as the business owner, as the employee, because then they just moved right into the self-employed. They had their team, but they were still handling everything. They weren't delegating. They weren't truly delegating anything. And these were smart people, driven, resourceful, all of that. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with their identity and how they saw themselves and how they saw business. Then they moved from that self-employed to being a business owner, and where they're directing and leading the business, but they're letting someone else run that business, to an investor mindset. Now, we have to go through kind of that similar transition to when we're working in the community. And again, to go full circle on this, when we're talking about, well, I was invited to the meeting, I was invited to the table, and then I was invited to participate and provide input and solutions. That's some of those same stages that are going through as a community leader. So we're looking at, like, I'm an individual contributor, and I know employee is a little bit of an outdated term. It's team member, it's individual contributor. I'm just using the most basic terms at this point, but you get my point.
Mm-hmm.
We're progressing through those stages. So I'm currently writing a book. The title is Strategic Impact. It's slated to be coming out in the spring of 2024. So I appreciate the segue and let me mentioning that. That is what, to have a strategic impact, to map out what the process is really critical. That's the difference between the kind of aim from the hip approach, kind of the spaghetti approach. Let's throw spaghetti on the wall and see if anything sticks, versus I have something intentional that I want to do. I want to collaborate. I want to work with others. I want to build community. It's not just I want to get my stuff done. It's like, how can we work as a community, as an organization, to get what we want to get done?
Yeah.
And that's how we sustain the community. How that happens is I first have to work on myself, on my identity, and how I see myself as a leader. And I can be a quiet leader. Some of the best leaders are not out there on the table, rah, rah, cheer, cheer, and giving everyone. Some of the best leaders are just good listeners. And they're letting people that have that drive to do things, they're just helping guide them through the process. So let those heroes of the community be the heroes. We can be the guides. We can be the consultants. We can help them, guide them through that process, and then the whole community wins at that point. So I'm hoping that connects with you.
I think that connects not only with me, but I think that resonates with the nation and eventually, and even the world, even, because basically, it's in order to become a nation again, right? Because we're so divided right now on everything, anything and everything.
Yep.
I like how you said you must first see ourselves being that, right? Like be the change you
Yep.
want to see in the world, kind of, sort of. So in order to be a nation, the local level, being the individual, right? The household, the community, and then we can see ourselves becoming a nation, because we'll have practiced being a nation on the smaller scale and scale it up to the full nation, actually growing in unity and goals and destination for the full benefits of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Clint, I think you made some great points today. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, pleasure's all mine. The honor was all mine. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Let them know. I flashed your email up there from the contacts you. Please let them know a list of value, additional contacts if you have it.
Yeah.
Let's let them know where they can reach out to you at real quick verbally, and the emails on the screen as well.
Yeah, reach out. Yeah, my email address, clint.walton@walton-gc.com. Yeah, we can also be found through our domain, through our website, walton-gc.com. So yeah, reach out to us and let's have a conversation. I invite those that are watching or listening. Contact me. We can help maybe guide you through some of the challenges or opportunities that you have, in front of you, and what is strategically connected to your mission. It's real easy to get distracted. We can go after 15 things at the same time. But we don't know, only maybe one or two of those things are actually the right thing that we should be working on. So that's in essence what we do, is help folks, organizations really focus in and zone in on what is their optimum level of contribution. So well, I appreciate the invitation.
Always a perfect day. I appreciate your contribution to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Clint. Say bye to the people.
Thank you again. Have a great day.
Pasha, Paroh, thank you for tuning. Enjoy.